Welcome, everyone, and thank you for taking time to join us today. My name is Edward Hillel, and it's my pleasure to host this 10th and final episode of Season 2 of the G Sessions. This weekly live short conversation is part of the Generation Project, a public art campaign to encourage dialogue between people from all walks of life, so that we recognize that we are all immigrants of different generations, or what we like to call Gs. As this extraordinary year, 2020 winds down, one thing evidently clear is that we need meaningful dialogue between us. We need to think about and participate in making our future together. And we're grateful that the G Sessions are making a contribution towards that end. Well, today I'm especially excited to host my friend and collaborator, the photographer and educator, Isaac Diggs. Hello there, Isaac.
Hello, Edward. It's nice to see you. What a pleasure and honor to be with you. I didn't realize this was the last episode for Season 2. So that's even more special. I'm glad we could have this chat.
We saved the best for last, my friend.
Amen, brother. We'll see. Right.
So I guess we met and began working together. We keep saying, yesterday you said 2006 in our conversation with Nola. I'd said 2004, somewhere around there. It's been a minute.
Right. I think, there's a distinction between when we were first introduced and when we actually started making photographs.
And I guess that's what brought us together, right? Photography. And, well, yeah, I mean, we both have a lot of photographer friends, but somehow we managed to take it to the next level and start working together. And here we are, 16 or something years later. So today we're going to talk about a little bit about the past and, of course, your G status. I know I gave you some homework there.
Some homework, yes. And I've been a good student. I've got some information to report that is new to me. So I'm particularly excited.
That's very exciting.
Yeah.
That's what I really find really exciting about this project, which wasn't really embedded in the concept, but what ends up happening. But first, can you share something about your early interest in photography, why you were drawn to it, maybe connected to place, since that's one of the things that we connect all the time, memory and place?
Sure. Yeah, that's really easy for me to do. I started making photographs when I was in my early teens, 13, 14, in part because one Christmas my father was gifted a Canon 8E1 with a whole bunch of lenses and accessories. And he took a course at the local community college in Cleveland to just get introduced to the darkroom. And he did that. And then the camera pretty much sat in his closet until I kind of picked it up and started working with it. And it was shortly after that I kind of started making photographs with my own camera, which I was then gifted one when they saw my interest in it. And I kept making pictures thereafter. And shortly after my 13th, 14th birthday, I moved with my mother to Connecticut from Cleveland. My parents had divorced, much earlier when I was like 3 years old. So when my mother moved, I went with her to Connecticut, and photography became even more important to me as a way of kind of documenting place, family. Took a lot of family photographs, photographs of my new home, my new city. Started looking at pictures of, Cleveland, where I was from, when I'd make trips back to see my dad or to see other family members who were still in Cleveland. My camera started to become my constant companion, and would go with me on various travels. My first trip to Europe, I think I was 14, and I took my camera with me there and made a whole bunch of pictures, which I still have, actually, these Kodachrome slide film.
That must be
yeah, I was much more adventurous. I would never shoot slide film now. It was just too complicated. But anyway, I was carefree. Just put the film in, shoot it. You get back the results. But anyway, so all through high school, I was taking photographs for my high school yearbook, for drama productions. I was kind of the behind the scenes, backstage photographer. I'd help put together the playbill. They would use my photographs for that. So it was really a part of my high school experience too. And I never really considered doing it professionally or as an artist until I was deep into college. But my kind of senior year, I took actually my first darkroom course, and kind of went from there. I kind of had been self-taught up till that point. All through high school, I was processing film and black and white film. But when I got to school, they only offered one darkroom course. They didn't even have a formal art program that would come, several years after I graduated. And but they did have this one black and white darkroom course that I took, and that was enough. It's like, this is what I'm doing. So, wow. Yeah, this is what I'm doing.
At what point, was there a particular point where you started to feel, hey, I love to do this, but it's also bigger than me. I can actually, make a contribution. I can pass something on that's bigger than me. Was there a point of realization like that?
Well, I came to New York to go to college. And by that time I was living in Florida. Again, my mom had moved again. So I was in Florida, graduated from high school down there, hightailed it to New York. And it was when I got to New York that my kind of world and mind expanded. And I started to read a lot about African-American culture, was studying African-American literature, had ambitions to be a writer at one point, thought I would maybe teach English lit and go after a PhD. All those kind of thoughts were going through my head because I realized I had a much bigger interest, I guess, more generally in culture. That's what I called it. That's how I thought about it, whether that meant music or literature or the visual arts. I didn't know which way it was going to go, but I was hanging around musicians. I was a kind of DJ on the local radio station, jazz DJ. I was going out to hear music. I was seeing a lot of art. I was being introduced to writers, and I thought, this is the world I want to be in. And so there was a realization that photography could take me to those places. I could meet those people. I could be in that environment, and I could not only kind of be in it, but make a contribution to it through the pictures I was making, whether it was just as a kind of straight up documentarian or, something else. So it was, I got introduced to, I guess, the professional world of photography through Wynton Marsalis, actually, who came. I was a DJ at WKCR FM, the Columbia radio station.
Yeah.
And Wynton came to the station to be interviewed, and I took some photographs of him in the studio, which I then managed to get to him some way or other. And he told me that I should meet a guy named Frank Stewart, who was at the time making a book with him called, I think, Sweet Swing Blues on the Road, something like that, published by Norton. And it was a book about the orchestra, the Lincoln Center Jazz Orchestra, and Wynton Marsalis. And so Frank had traveled all across the country, all around the world with him, and was putting together a book. And it was at that point that I met him and he was my mentor. He was the one who, kind of took me under his wing for a couple of years. And this was just as I was kind of graduating from college, senior year, couple of years out of college, I was working with him as a quasi assistant. It was more informal than that. But it gave me access to Lincoln Center's rehearsals. So I'd often go and photograph, when they did Blood on the Fields, which was a big kind of orchestral production they did, I think in the mid to late 90s. I was kind of photographing all of those rehearsals in and around Lincoln Center, because Frank was doing that work too. So I just kind of hang out. And it was a lot of fun. It was very heady. And I was making pictures and photographing people that I really was into. And it just kind of continued from there. I met Mr. DeCarava for the first and only time at Hunter. Frank was a student of his. So it was a lot of fun.
Wow. Yeah. Being in New York, I guess that's what happens. It's all concentrated here. Well, that's funny. I didn't know that about you. And I realized that that's where our photography stories connect, because I started much later. And those period you described, 2 years, let's say, after college graduation, I started photographing musicians, jazz musicians, blues musicians. Of course, I was in Montreal, so it wasn't New York. But I found them.
Yeah. They're great subjects. Great subjects.
Yeah. And kind of brought us back to what we just finished in Detroit, which we're not going to talk about now. Okay. So, but I want to know, because as well as being a really fabulous photographer, you are a wonderful teacher. You are a teacher to students at the School of Visual Arts, teach photography. You teach everything from darkroom to digital techniques. And you're also a wonderful teacher to your friends. So tell me about the importance of education in your practice, like visual literacy. How do you see making photographs with the importance of people understanding the language of photography, the way you would teach English?
Wow. Well, thank you for all that. I really love teaching. It's a part of my practice that I've really grown to appreciate. And one of the things that I've also been fortunate enough to do is to work with the Studio Museum in Harlem, as with their Expanding the Walls program, which is about conveying visual literacy to very talented high school students. And so for the past few years, before I moved, I'm now, as you know, in Atlanta, having just left New York. But I worked with them for about 5 years, which was fabulous. But I approach photography as a kind of language. My background, as I said, is in literature. And so there's a way in which that really influences how I think about photography, how I think about sequencing photography, reading photography, creating books from the photographs, many of which incorporate text and essays. For me, photography is definitely, we'll talk about it as a visual language, but the reference for me is the written word, quite honestly. Right. Even as subject, I love kind of photographing signage and language as it exists out, in the landscape, whether it's advertisements or little flyers that are left on the ground, or magazines or books that one might come across on the street. I'm a sucker for that kind of stuff.
Amazing. It's amazing how much we could learn about a culture just by reading the texts that are out there in public space.
Right. So
our time is actually flying. This is
okay. Okay. Sorry
about these conversations. They're tight, but we get into some deep subject matter. Now, before I ask you about your own G status, I want to remind everybody out there that you're also all Gs. We're all Gs. Somewhere down your ancestral line, we all come from somewhere. G0s, like me, born elsewhere. G1s are born here from immigrant parents, and so on. So Isaac, now that you've done your homework, I thank you. You can tell us about your status. Where are your ancestors from?
Well, having my brother did the whole DNA thing. And so I've learned, funnily enough, that I am about a third Nigerian, and having married a Nigerian.
Amazing.
It's interesting. So Nigeria and kind of Cameroon, that kind of western edge of the African continent, is where about 50% of my kind of heritage comes from. That's the bulk of it. But once we start talking about the United States, I traced my family on both my mother and father's sides to various places in the South, which is no surprise. As far back as the early 1800s. So like 1820s, 1830s is when I can kind of identify my first relatives who were spread out. I mean, Virginia on my kind of father's side, and Alabama on my father's side, like my father's mother, her line, Tilly, is from Alabama. And on my mother's side, it's primarily South Carolina and Mississippi on her father's side. So that's kind of where my people come from, as early as the early 1800s, from what I could find. Another interesting fact I discovered, I'd known a little bit about this, but I'm doing some further digging. My folks on my mother's side were very involved in founding the Kojic Church, the Church of God in Christ, down in Tennessee. So they were, I think, very much involved in that from the very beginning. So that's some more research I've got to do, but I found that pretty fascinating.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's amazing. It's amazing how the forced migration from Africa that brought your family, your ancestors here, which I guess makes you a G16 or a G17.
Mm-hmm.
Your migration continued in this country as your ancestors were spread out within the United States, and how you continue to have a pretty nomadic life. It's within the United States.
Well, it was my grandparents on both sides that actually came north. So my grandmother moved from North Carolina to Cleveland. My father's mother moved from Alabama to Ohio, another part of Ohio, and that's kind of where they set up their own families and put down roots. So that's where I really come from, that Ohio area, Cleveland and Northeast Ohio. But it's interesting now that I find myself in Georgia. I lived in Florida for a second, but really kind of what I imagine will be my longest time in the South. I'm going to dig a little deeper, do some exploration of those other areas.
Why do you think they moved your grandparents to
opportunity?
Ohio, opportunity.
Yeah, it was that whole kind of classic World War thing, Yeah.
World War I.
Yeah, both. On both sides of my family, the men were in the military. They kind of came back and took advantage of some of those opportunities as much as they existed for African American men, and settled, kind of came north. And I think too, at least for my grandmother, she came north looking for a job. It was an opportunity to work, and whether it was in a factory or some other kind of work that she didn't have where she was at,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's funny. It's interesting that you say opportunity, because of course, that is the classic immigrant experience, right? We run away from bad things and towards opportunity, and this was really one of the impetus for this project, is to look at the African American experience from the point of view of immigration, migration, opportunity, and not just to pigeonhole as the experience of slavery and post-slavery.
Yeah.
And so your family story, Isaac, which I've now learned, is absolutely fascinating. And really thank you for sharing it with us. The last word is yours if you'd like to say anything.
Well, yes, I just want to thank you, and I'm so appreciative of the invitation. It's been a prompt for me to dig a little deeper and find out some information that I didn't have about my family, and that's really been incredible. So thank you for that.
Yeah, wonderful, wonderful. So thank you. That wraps up another session. You could learn more about us at www.gproject.org, like our Instagram and Facebook, and share your own G stories and photos. And on Saturday, we are having a special wrap-up of Season 2 on Zoom at 11 a.m. And I guess if you want to know more, please get in touch with us through our Facebook or our website. And that's it. Thanks, Isaac, again.
Thank you.
We will see you soon.